Muy buenos días y muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos quienes nos acompañan en este lanzamiento y conferencia de prensa donde la CEPAL presentará su panorama social de América Latina y el Caribe 2025 y que estamos realizando de manera híbrida desde la sede de esta comisión en Santiago de Chile, pero también a través de las plataformas Webex, el sitio live.cepal.org, el sitio web de la CEPAL, www.cepal.org, y nuestras cuentas en plataformas sociales como YouTube, X y Facebook. La presentación de este documento la realizará, por supuesto, el secretario ejecutivo de la CEPAL, don José Manuel Salazar Sirinach, y nos acompañan en esta ocasión en la mesa principal el director de la División de Desarrollo Social de la CEPAL, Alberto Arenas, división que coordina la elaboración de este informe, el director del CELADE, División de Población de la CEPAL, Simone Cecchini, la directora de la División de Asuntos de Género, doña Ana Huesmes, el jefe de la Unidad de Estadísticas Sociales de la División de Estadísticas de la CEPAL, Javier Mancero. Nos acompañan también oficiales y funcionarios de la CEPAL que han participado en la elaboración de este informe: Daniela Truco, María Luisa Mariño, Jorge Rodríguez.
María Luisa Amarillo, Jaime Garcia, and Rodrigo Martinez. We would like to thank as well the presence of the directors and the officers of ECLAC who are with us today this morning. And we would like to thank all the representatives of the diplomatic corps who are with us today, including also the media who are following us virtually and here in the room during this launching of the report. After this presentation by the Executive Secretary, we will go to the QA session. We would like to remind the representatives of the media that are accredited for this conference to let us have their concerns by the chat box of the platform Webex that is being used for the following of this launching, and also through arroba conferencia prensa at ECLAC. Yeah. You have the floor now. Thank you, Guido. And good morning. Good morning, everyone, all who are accompanying us in the room and for this presentation, and also the people who are following us virtually in this presentation for the Social Panorama of Latin America and the Caribbean 2021. And I would like to thank particularly all the members of the media, the press, who are going to help us disseminate the important data and the messages, including in this social panorama. This document, as we have said before, is coordinated by the Division of Social Development and is produced by this division together with the Statistics Division and the Division of Gender Affairs of ECLAC, thanks to Alberto Arelas and all the people from his division and all the divisions who participated also in the production of this panorama. As you may have heard from ECLAC, we saw the country under a trap. First of all, a low capacity to grow, wide inequality, and weak social cohesion, and also the institutionality that is not very effective. In this edition of the Social Panorama, we covered this, how to get out of this trap of high inequality, low social mobility, and with social cohesion. And I would like to have the presentation displayed because I'm going to present now the second slide, that is the index for the contents for this report. And here you have it. We have chapter number 1 that discusses the different data regarding the inequality of income. Also, we have the reduction of the social mobility. Number 3 is focused on the gender inequality and discrimination and the violation of the human rights as main factors. And the fourth is the institutional framework and the role of the social expenditure. I will start with a brief description of our work regarding this trap of high inequality, low social mobility, and weak social cohesion as a preparatory part for the summit, that summit that was held in Doha, Qatar. Then I will go the floor to Alberto Arenas to present the main results of each one of the chapters of this document. We will conclude with some final remarks.
Entonces,
I will start with the introduction to give you a general framework on this year's Panorama, the document in the 40th period of sessions of ECLAC that was held a little more than a year ago in Lima, Peru. You can see on the right hand is called Latin America and the Caribbean Between the Traps of Development, Transformations, and How to Management. Here, we introduce the three traps that I mentioned that are not independent. They're highly interrelated, and that we explain in that document and that we have been reiterating often. We have been doing research on this. This division of Social Panorama 2025 goes in depth in the analysis and recommendations to address the second trap, high inequality and weak social and social mobility, low social mobility. High inequality is a characteristic of the region. This shows the Gini evolution line in blue since 2014 and the average of the OECD countries in orange. As you can see, the Gini index was reduced in some points over the decade to 0.45, a slight reduction, but it exceeds the average of the OECD 0.31 in 14 percentual points. High inequality is unacceptable from the point of view of human rights, social justice, and it is inefficient from the economic standpoint because, among other things, it reinforces and interacts with the first trap of low capacity of growth. It is important to understand that inequality is a multi-dimension phenomenon that goes beyond any income disparities, and this document makes an effort to address different dimensions and causes of high inequality in the region. ECLAC has stated that there are 7 main factors. They're not the only ones, but they're the main ones that explain the trap of high inequality, low social mobility, and weak social cohesion. First, low economic growth in the region for the last decades. This low growth gives a low dynamism to the labor market, and this leads to the low creation of high quality employment that is one of the main ladders of social mobility upwards. Low dynamism and the low ability to create high quality labor is one of the factors analyzed in the report. But when we talk about production and productive structure, it is not only a matter of insufficient growth, but productive heterogeneity. This is the large differences of productivity between sectors, size of companies, and territories or region. This also determines the differences in income levels among the workers occupied in those sectors, companies, and territories. This is inequality is rooted in the characteristics of productive structures. Second are regressive tax systems. If they were more progressive, they could compensate at least part of the inequality in the productive aspect. Also, social policies and social protection does not manage to reduce inequality on the productive side. And there is a discussion if there is high inequality in the productive sides, we need to see if social measures are enough. And therefore, it would be very expensive to compensate this phenomenon. And this is an argument that we have to say that we need comprehensive policies. There isn't one magic wand for everything, and there isn't only one single element. Therefore, we need to approach this in a comprehensive manner. Fourth, educational systems with severe weaknesses. There is a lack of coverage, especially in secondary education, also low learning results, and the educational systems cannot promote upward mobility or to fight inequality. And you will see this in the report. Fifth is gender inequality and insufficient care systems and policies. This is another element analyzed in the report, and we have a separate report on the topic. And the sixth is high inequality and space segregation in urban areas. And seventh is discrimination and violation of human rights suffered by certain groups of the population. This is the list of the 7 main factors, 5 of which are analyzed in this panorama that we are publishing. We're analyzing the first one here in the chart, especially regarding the low dynamism of the labor market, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the seventh, which is discrimination, especially regarding the situation of indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, and migrant population. This slide shows the main work published by ECLAC on the trap of high inequality, low social mobility, and weak social cohesion between October 2024 and November 2025, many of which were written to be presented in specific regional or international events. Among the publications, I would like to highlight the last one of October 2024, the special report presented in November 2024 within the framework of the social G20 meetings. Also, the second one for the second summit of social development, the other one related to inequality issues, and the second World Summit on Social Development of June 2025. The seminar on inequality that we organized with IDB and Guatemala in July of this year. And finally, this edition that we're publishing today regarding how to escape the trap. It is important to clarify that Latin America and the Caribbean as a region developed and undertook the concept of inclusive social development in the third meeting of the Regional Conference on Social Development of Latin America and the Caribbean in Mexico 2019. And this emphasizes on the need to guarantee access to essential services and overcome the obstacles that reproduce inequalities and exclusion. In the path towards the Second World Summit in Qatar this month, ECLAC supported the countries to develop a statement around the challenges of social development that included the issues of the trap and promoted inclusive development. In Doha, this inclusive social development concept was included for the first time. This was a development in the region, and complying with the commitments undertaken in Qatar will require multiple efforts from the countries and also a follow-up in their implementation, as is the case in these large international summits. The political statement requires the regional commissions of the United Nations to support the follow-up, review, and implementation of the agreed agenda through previous meetings for the global exams being planned, and ECLAC is committed to supporting the follow-up of the agreements of Qatar in the region, and we will do it, among other things, through the Regional Conference on Social Development of Latin America and the Caribbean. This chart is a summary of the main activities of outputs and accompanying of ECLAC in the entire process for preparation for the World Summit. As you see, it's quite intense. Between October 2024 and November 2025, there were 6 documents, 5 regional activities to accompany that process in the path towards Qatar. I would like to highlight a document created jointly by the 5 commissions of the United Nations, coordinated by ECLAC, and that presents the main social challenges and their specificities in each region of the world. This is a summary of the main numbers of the panorama. Now, Alberto will talk about the charts and details, but this is to give you an overview of the numbers. First, income inequality is high, with a slight trend to reduction between 14 to 24. In 2024, the Gini coefficient went to 0.452 compared to 0.456 between 2023 and 2024. monetary poverty reduces significantly from 27.7% to 25.5%. Multidimensional poverty was reduced from 34.4 to 20.9 between 2014 and 2024, mainly due to advancements in housing and services. Regarding for each 100 men with multidimensional privation, there are 122 women in the same situation. This indicator has been stagnated between 2014 and 2024. Something very concerning is that inequality of educational opportunities, a combination between results of coverage and learning, is twofold in Latin America compared to the rest of the countries of the OECD. This would be addressed by promoting labor formalization to reduce poverty and have a redistribution impact. It is estimated that the Gini index would drop 14% with full formality. This is that the gap of the Gini line would be reduced with the rest of the countries of the OECD if we achieved 100% of formalization, which would be enormous. Also, there is less than 40% of people with disabilities between 15 and 59 years old are part of the labor market, compared to 75% of people without disabilities within the same age range. And finally, in terms of social expenditure, in 2024, the social expenditure of the central government of Latin America was 11.6% of the GDP and 53.7% of the total public expenditure. This shows a stabilization after the reduction of social expenditure post-pandemic, because it was highly increased in 2020 with the pandemic. As I mentioned, the title is How to Escape the Trap of High Inequality, Low Social Mobility, and Weak Social Cohesion. I mentioned 7 main factors for this trap, and out of which 5 are analyzed in this report. And this leads to a recommendation and analysis of 5 strategies to exit the trap. First, reducing educational inequality. Second, creation of quality employment. This is fast, but this is very important. This is a summary. Third, advance in gender equality and society of care. Fourth, face discrimination and exclusion of people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and migrant people. Also, 5, continue strengthening social institutionality and its financing. Other strategies, such as advancing towards more progressive tax structures, such as the improvement and broadening of social protection and acceleration of productive transformation, are also key. However, they're not analyzed in this edition of the Panorama. Now I would like to give the floor to Alberto Arenas, Director of the Social Division, to present the main results of the 3 chapters of the report. Alberto, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary. Chapter 1 of this edition of the Social Panorama of Latin America and the Caribbean is focused on income inequality and poverty. The concentration of income is still extreme in Latin America. And as we can see in the chart, the richest 10% represented in green on the right side comprises 34.2% of the total income, while the poorest 10% only reaches 1.7%, which can be barely seen there in an orange bar. The wealthiest 10% captures between 30 and 44% of the total income in the 16 countries represented in the graph. The highest values are in Colombia, Brazil, and Panama. The lowest decile only receives 0.9 and 2.5% of the total income. And more thorough measurements that add information from surveys, tax registries, and national accounts suggest that inequality is even greater. The participation of 10% of the 10% of the wealthiest 10% would exceed the 50% of total income on average in the region. Between 2021 and 2024, the Gini index on average dropped 3% in Latin America. in the 5 countries included in the chart, where we saw reductions of greater magnitude. These responded mainly, as mentioned by the Executive Secretary, to labor market dynamics, which are having a significant effect in the reduction of inequality. These 5 countries reduced the Gini index at a pace of 0.9% per year, represented in yellow or orange, from the countries Brazil, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Brazil, and Honduras and Mexico. They mostly come from salaries, those that contributed mostly to the reduction of inequalities, 0.6 percentage point, represented in blue on the left. State public transfers had an outstanding role, especially in Brazil, where they contributed with half of the reduction. In 2024, income poverty was decreased 2.2 percentage points, reaching 25.5% of the regional population, which constitute the lowest data that we have record of. Extreme poverty went from 2.8% of the population in 2024. This reduction, 9.8%, I'm sorry, this went from 164 million to 162 million people between 2023 and 2024, and was promoted mostly by the changes in Mexico and to a lower extent by Brazil. Salary income was also the main source of variation of the poverty rate during 2024. And poverty, as you can see there in the chart, is 2.2 percentage points lower than in 2014, which was the lowest benchmark that we had up until that date with comparable data. And it is currently 2.1 points lower.
For 2025, we just project a low decrease of the poverty, and this is because there are very poor projections for growth in the region. Now, ECLAC has made headway in the measuring of the multidimensional poverty, and 6 months ago, we launched this multidimensional poverty index, as you can see in the graph, between 2014, the decrease to 29%. And we can see that this index has different dimensions in Latin America, the housing, health, education, employment, and pension funds, as is depicted here. And although there is this unfavorable context, the public policies contributed to reduce the number of people with the critical deprivations between 2014 to 24 is the result of the reduction that is moderate in the sector of education and health, and the stagnation of the employment and pension fund sector. And the heterogeneity is significantly varying, 28.9% in 2024, but this has a range of between 3 and 78%, and is higher to the poverty, the monetary poverty, that is between 4 and 56%. The multidimensional poverty is especially touching the girl and children and those who live in the rural area, and the women also experience more compared to men. We can see here on the left-hand side that the multidimensional poverty has been reduced in all the sectors, age sectors, between 2014 and the 24, but it's still affecting more the people over 18 years of age in the blue bar. In 2024, we see the women who have the multidimensional poverty issues are exceeding the range of men, and this gap has stayed unchanged in the last recent years, as the executive secretary was saying. In chapter number 2, we're presenting how education and the labor market are factors for the reduction of inequality and the increase of the social mobility. The region is facing a double educational challenge that is marked by the inequality in terms of coverage and learning. In the coverage, we have a low completion of the secondary education. 28% of the students from 20 to 24 didn't conclude the secondary, with a gap of 37 percentage points in the extreme quintiles, and we see those that are lagging behind in the PISA test. We see 78% of them, they didn't complete this ability is 87% in the quartile, lower social economic, and 47 in the upper quartile. In terms of learning, we see that there is this educational lag, and we see in PISA 22, the 77% of the students of 15 age of the public sector schools didn't have the mathematical skills compared to the private school. We see this circle showing 77 and 46, and when we compare this average in Latin America with the OECD, we see that there is a significant gap where the one for the OECD is lower to the gap in the region. Facing this contact, this ECLAC is making also progress for a new bidimensional measurement of the inequality of educational opportunities, and this bidimensional index combines the coverage and the learning outcomes in the case of OECD that are lower results, while the average in Latin America doubles the level of the OECD. The reductions in Latin America were a combination between the progress of the reduction of poverty and also the quality in the outcomes. And we need to continue to advance in both senses. The reduction of the inequality or the educational inequality is a key component. There is a relationship between the education of the children and the um, schooling of the parents in the tertiary and secondary cycles. And those are the inequalities that are inherited. In the green line, we can observe, for example, that 89% of the young people with at least one parent that concluded the secondary education will also finish this cycle. And this goes down to 50% when the parents did not finish this cycle. Those who have a parent with a complete tertiary education with the blue color line, and they attain the same level, and this goes down to 9% when the primary school has not been concluded. The mobility is now explained by this mobility that there is between the primary and secondary school that is shown here in the dotted line and in the green and red lines. Well, in facing these challenges, or to face these challenges, we need better policies to improve the teaching, and we need to invest in the childhood. We need to include all the policies for the unfavored sectors, and we need to reinforce the role of the teachers. And this is very important to reduce the education inequality, and this should be done in a context where we have the sustainable funding of the education. In 2025, we proposed that investing more and better in better terms, should not be a consequence of development, but an indispensable condition to reduce inequality and to attain the inclusive social development, placing people at the center of the rights and promoting also a life that is free of inequality, poverty, and hunger. Now, concerning the impact on the quality, we see that the region is facing a situation of informality, not inclusive, with 47% of the employed people with the structural gaps that reduces the equality of opportunity. The women and the young people are facing more barriers with the low participation, more unemployment, and an overload of the care work. We say out of two women are out of the labor force, and the young people are um, three times as higher in these terms. In 2025, we're including also an exercise that is very innovative to estimate the effect of the formalization of labor that would have a high impact of the reduction of the poverty amongst the unemployed. The labor formalization is also increasing the income and the social protection, reducing the poverty and inequality in the most vulnerable sector. The estimation uh, show that the formalization, if you can see this in the chart, and we have in this chart the formalization showing the informalization at a point in time, and then we can reduce the poverty between the employed and employed from 14.9% to 8.6%, and inequality from 0.472 to 466. And we see that it also creates impacts, particularly in the sectors of domestic work, the micro enterprises, where increasing the formality could also translate into this reduction of poverty and inequality. The creation of quality employment is another effective strategy to reduce the inequality and increase the social mobility. The creation of the quality labor requires to include the policies of productive development, streamlining all these issues, and the labor institutionality, the systems of policies and care system. The formalization is a necessary condition in order to run the rise and to make progress in the financial sustainability of the social protection. In chapter number 4, we are also facing the gender inequality and the discrimination and violation of the human rights and the factors for the reduction of the inequality. This gender inequality is expressed in 4 structural knots, as we can see here in the diagram. The social economic inequality and the poverty persisting in this context is one of these 4 knots. 1 out of 4 women do not have their own income, compared to 1 of 10 men undergoing the same situation in 2023. Then we have the patriarchal structures that are discriminating and violent. 20.8% of women between 20 and 24 years of age were already married or had a stable union in 2024. And when we speak of the concentration of the power of the hierarchy structure, women have 35% of the seats in the national parliaments and 29% of the deliberating structures of the local government. Then we have the rigid sexual divide of labor. 27% of women were working in the care economy, compared to 6% of men in 2023. In this context, moving to the gender equality and the care society, that is one of the 11 transformations that are needed to escape the development traps and to have to prevent the high inequality, low social mobility, and weak social cohesion. Then we have the overload of work for the women in the labor and the care activities. We have the situation of women who are not remunerated, that is higher in all age groups. We can see the first quintile, and 38% of the young women between 15 and 29 devote themselves to the non-remunerated care activities. We can see here in the violet area. If we compare the violet to the graph of men, there is a significant difference of 38 and 3.4%. This overload is also restricting the participation of the young people in education, in the labor market, in the political sphere, and also the time for rest. There is also a very strong segregation of gender in the tertiary education. In the left-hand side, you can see that 10.8% of the women graduate from these programs of engineering, mathematics, and so on, and 28.3 in the case of men. In the right-hand side, you can see that 40.6% of the women graduated in the tertiary education obtained their diploma in health and well-being, compared to 20.9% for men. So there is a very important segregation in terms of gender in the tertiary education. In chapter number 3, we also cover the people with disability, the First Nation or indigenous people, and the migrants. The people with disabilities first, we can see that they are facing more barriers in order to participate and have access to education and employment. The people with disabilities are facing lower educational levels and labor participation, and therefore this entails more informality, and their labor inclusion is also precluded. And we see that people from 15 to 55 years of age make part of the labor market with the contract with people without disabilities in the same range of age. We see that women are in a particular disadvantage. We see the red triangles are all in the lower range, and there is a gap of over 50 percentage points that are the blue circles for men, and this gap of 50 percentage points in countries like Peru, Bolivia, and Paraguay, compared to men without disabilities and a woman with a disability, and concerning their labor rates in those countries. Concerning now the ethnic gaps, they are widening the territories with more indigenous presence, and they have less access to this education in the territories with more presence of indigenous. There are more gaps in the upper education. We can see the graphics for all the areas when we go from the first to the fifth quintile. The gap is wider, and we see differentiated situation with the situation in the territory.
Migrant persons face discrimination and educational exclusion and labor exclusion. There is a higher educational exclusion between children and adolescents of the migrant community between 13 and 17 years of age, and in women in yellow, with the exception of Panama, we can see it here. The yellow bars are the highest in all countries for educational exclusion, and migrant persons have higher rates of labor participation, but a lower insertion and formal employment. And paid domestic work represents a significant path of going into the market, but they're mostly informal. The recommendations of this chapter to reduce inequality and promote social mobility, to advance in gender equality and society of care, is to promote the participation of women and educational, labor, and productive development policies that include science, technology, and innovation, leverage the advantages of digital transformation and economy, and also implement programs and mechanisms also to face discrimination and inclusion of indigenous peoples and migrant people, promote an inclusive education that tears down prejudice and barriers for people with disabilities, also increase educational opportunities in indigenous territories by improving infrastructure, digital connectivity, and the support of bilingual teachers with intercultural training, and also advance in migratory regularization to integrate migrant persons. Chapter 4 presents the institutionality and the role of social expense. The region has strengthened social institutionality between 1995 and 2025, which increased from 20 to 23 in the number of countries with ministries of social development. Most of them have expanded their mandates to address other groups of the population, such as youth, the elder, indigenous peoples, women, and people with disabilities. Apart from these institutional advancements to improve the governance of social inclusion policies, we need to strengthen technical, operational, politic, and prospective institutional capacities called TOPP. Their critical function is to create and use information to lead decisions and measure results. Operational has to do with articulated implementation and interinstitutional coordination. Political legitimacy, coalitions, and sustainability of policies, and prospective anticipation of trends. In that technical aspect, access to information is very important. And for that, we did a review of statistical visibility of census and household surveys to identify the needs of the different populations. The identification of indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant peoples is present in the census of 24 of the 29 countries, respectively, and in 19 of the 13 cases in surveys. Disability is present in 32 censuses and 10 surveys, migration 32 censuses and 17 surveys, and also surveys identify also questions regarding the perception of discrimination due to belonging to indigenous peoples, 5, Afro-descendants, 6, disability 6, and migration 5. This will be absolutely vital to support the technical dimension and with those institutional capacities, especially in the ministries of social development, to advance in its goals. Regarding social expenditure, this was 11.6% of the GDP in 2024 in Latin America and 11% of the GDP in the Caribbean, quite similar to the levels registered in 2023. Latin America had an average participation of 53% of social public expenditure in 2024, and social expenditure is still the main component of public expenditure, social public expenditure. Regarding social expenditure per capita on average, this has overcome the pre-pandemic levels. In the region, social public expenditure per capita reached an average of $1,326 in 2024, which is an increase of 2.9% compared to 2023. We can see the different subregions with Central America, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic in green, purple, Latin America, red, South America, and the highest one in the Caribbean, where there was a great expansion of social expenditure in 2024, more than 7%, which is the highest tendency in the sub-regions. And finally, we made estimations on the effect of money transfers to reduce poverty and reduce inequality. And these are highly redistributive, especially those that have the purpose of reducing poverty. In 2023, social protection non-contributive programs had an important effect in the reduction of poverty, 3.4 percentage points. And when we analyzed the group of people of 65 years old and higher, it was reduced in 7.8 percentage point. The scope of transfer is small. This represents only 2.3% of the income in 2023, due to which the effect on the concentration of income is reduced. However, there is a reduction in the Gini coefficient that was of 0.017% in 2023. Mr. Executive Secretary, I would like to give you the floor for the final conclusions of Social Panorama 2025. Thank you very much, Alberto. And now we will present the final messages. This is a summary of the conclusions, but not only to repeat some data, but to focus on some analytical conclusions. The first thing is that income concentration is still extreme. We said that the wealthiest 10% captures 34.2% of the total income. A conclusion is that the greatest reductions in inequality responded mostly to labor market dynamics, which highlights the great importance of having dynamic labor markets and what is behind them, which is processes of growth and investment, including productive development policies. And this is interrelated to the first trap of low ability to grow. Second, monetary poverty showed a significant reduction in 2024 until getting to the best record achieved in 2014. However, extreme poverty had 7.7 in 2014 that increased in 11% in 2019 to 13% with the pandemic in 2021, and still in 2024 it is at 9.8, 2 points higher compared to 2014. We're talking about 63 million people in extreme poverty. Third, in terms of education, despite advancements, this double educational challenge has become deeper to reduce inequality, which is coverage and the quality of teaching. These inequalities also present an obstacle to social mobility between generations. The region also faces a low dynamic labor market, which is segmented and excluding with high informality. The non-paid work overload limits the participation of young women in education, the labor market, and the public sphere, politics, and rest time. Also, people with disabilities, migrant peoples, and indigenous peoples face greater barriers to access to education and labor inclusion. These are all the factors that we presented in the trap, which are an obstacle to advance towards a more inclusive social development. And finally, how can we exit the high inequality, low social mobility, and weak social cohesion trap? In synthesis, we recommend these 5 strategies in the report. First, reduce educational inequality. Second, the creation of quality employment. Third, advance in gender equality and society of care. Fourth, face discrimination and the lack of respect to human rights of people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and migrant people. Fifth is to continue strengthening social institutionality and its funding. As we have said, we should advance towards more progressive tax structures, improve the coverage of social protection, and also accelerate productive transformation are also key. And part of our recommendations, however, they're not analyzed in this specific report. And the message that exiting the trap requires comprehensive policies is insufficient to work only in 1 or 2 components, and also acknowledge the fact that this is a multidimensional phenomenon, and that is why we need to have a comprehensive approach. And with that, we would like to conclude. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, secretario ejecutivo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary. Now we will go to the Q&A session from the media. We have already received a series of questions, and also we have the questions from the room. Otherwise, we will go to the first questions from Maria Martinez Moore from EFE, Spanish news agency. And this is the following. The report says that the reduction of the number of population in poverty at a regional level in 2024 is mainly explained due to the results of Mexico and to a lower extent of Brazil. Why has poverty been reduced in those countries? Is there a specific policy in these nations that has had an influence in the drop of poverty that could be replicated in other countries in the region? Maria Martinez Moore from EFE. Mr. Executive Secretary, please. Yes, thank you very much to Maria Martinez Moore for that interesting question. Yes, the reduction of poverty at a regional level is mostly explained by the evolution of Mexico and to a lower extent of Brazil. This is mostly because of the demographic weight of those countries, which account for 52% of the total population of the region. However, Mexico and Brazil were not the ones that had the highest percentage drops. In fact, for 2024, Mexico had the 4th place in terms of drop and Brazil the 7th. However, due to what I just mentioned, their variations have a strong impact in the regional level. An important point is that in both cases, the main engine to reduce poverty was the increase of labor income. We already addressed this. This is to salary increase. In Mexico, of the 3 percentage points reduced, 2 points are explained by an improvement in salaries promoted by the high increase of the minimum wage that was of approximately 35% between 18 and 2025. Other factors that contributed in Mexico were universal scholarships, the Benito Juarez scholarship transferred to vulnerable populations, and also increase of pensions and universal pensions for senior citizens. In Brazil, the reduction of 1.1 percentage point, 1.2 came from the salaries and 0.4 from greater non-contributive public transfers. Regarding the question of the convenience of replicating these policies and instruments in other countries, there's no doubt that there are some instruments and policies that would be advisable to replicate. For instance, the extension of social protection systems that include instruments such as transfers to vulnerable populations, the expansion of coverage for senior citizens and pensions, and also the feasibility to do this depends on the fiscal space of each country and the capacity of managing and broadening coverage, and also political will of each administration. Regarding minimum wage, this is a different thing. The convenience of these policies have to do with a minimum wage of each country. Mexico was the country that had the lowest minimum wage in Latin America around 2017 and 2018, before this policy was put in place. And its increase highly contributed to a very necessary balance to provide better wages to people. But in general, these and other measures should be analyzed in the context of the specific realities of each country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now we will go to another question from the French agency of news, France Press, through Paulina Abramovich.
Based on the report, when 25.5% of the population Latin America living under the poverty, the region reached the lowest value of the cash value since we have historical records. How Latin America attained these results in a very turmoil period with the pandemic? Which were the key factors for this progress? And this is from Paulina Abramovich from the French news agency France Press. Thank you, Paulina, for this question. Well, the region reduced the level of poverty during the pandemic because of four factors. First of all, the progressive normalization of the economic activity after the pandemic, after the rebound in 2022, the recovery of the labor market that was associated to this with the deterioration of this market during the pandemic, the disaggregation of the inflation with the crisis in cascade that we had, and one was the inflationary increase led by the food sector and also the cash transfers from the non-contributed social sector. And in 2020, the poverty has significantly increased because of the crisis from the pandemic, and this resulted also in a very important drop of the home income with the collapse of the labor market when the restrictions were suppressed. In 2022, the region has regained the pre-pandemic labor levels and also the increase of prices associated to other impacts, including the war in Ukraine and the higher value of energy also started to cease in 2023 with reduction of the inflation rate. The main driver of the reduction of poverty in 2024 was the increase of the real salaries driven by the deceleration of the inflation. We have said many times that the labor market is a key mechanism for the reduction of poverty. To this, in many other countries, also was added the non-contributive cash transfers. And then we have to remind that the reduction of poverty has been slower and is close to 9.8 and 2 percentage points compared to 2014, that is to say 10 years ago, and we are speaking still of 63 million people in the condition of extreme poverty. Thank you, Executive Secretary. And now IPS through Orlando Rinesi would ask the following question. There is a strategy that is suggested to reduce the reduction, the inequality is doing the development of skills and the curriculum and to prevent the school dropout. Could you delve into details about these formulas to improve the curriculum and then to how to prevent the school dropout from enterprise service? I understand that Alberto Arenas will answer this question.
Sí, perfecto. Bueno, Orlando.
Orlando, this is a fundamental issue. In fact, concerning this trap we have already discussed in depth this morning, we propose 5 strategies to reduce the high inequality, improving the social mobility and reducing the equality is one of these factors. And in terms of education, the countries are facing in the region, among other things, 2 challenges: reducing the inequalities of coverage and teaching or learning, sorry. And these are the challenges that should be faced simultaneously. Concerning now the inequality of coverage, we require, among other factors, to prevent the school dropouts. And to this end, we need to count on systems of early alert that are strengthened, allowing to identify through the collection of individual and family-related and institution-related data those who are at risk of dropout, and to act consequently. This should be complemented with programs for the reinforcement of the educational pathways with tutor plans, and also the school reinforcement and specific measures for the pregnant students with children. And to improve the quality of um, learning, we need to focus on the development of cognitive and social and emotional skills, digital skills also, that prepare the students for the evolving context, and in the um, reinforcement of the teachers' abilities also essential, as well as using the digital technologies in a smart way to customize the education for the specific condition of each one of the students. We need to deploy simultaneous um, efforts in order to reduce the inequalities of coverage and the opportunities of learning. Now we will explain the questions from Fabian Andres Condor from Thomson Reuters. Considering that in the recent times, many countries of the region are seeing more conservative governments and that are prone to the free market, how do you think that this is going to have an effect on the social stimuli in the region? What are the best performing countries doing in order to reduce the poverty, and considering the regional heterogeneity? Is there a better method to reduce gaps in the more vulnerable sectors? Fabian Gabriel Campero from Reuters. Thank you. Thank you, Fabian Andres Caldero, for these questions. First, concerning this shift towards these new governments, we are in a region that is very heterogeneous from the political, economic, and social point of views. And this is a region that has a very good articulating mechanisms. If we think in the regional area, we have, for example, the Conference for the Social Development in the region, that where all the communities of practice participate, and the countries agreed upon a priority is to have an inclusive social development, including the eradication of poverty, hunger, and reducing the inequality by creating quality labor opportunities. And there is a wide consensus that is specific for this matter in social matters. And as a matter of fact, the countries produced a document, and we contributed to create this document to be submitted at the second summit on social development. Many countries share this vision, and there is a high awareness that we still have a lot to do for reducing the poverty and inequality. I would add that even though there is a shift toward more conservative governments, the world is changing, and what is described today as conservative and progressive is also another new concept. It's not the same as it used to be. It's changing. And I think that many crises have taken place, and we have taken many lessons, and this straightforward and simplistic vision of the free market and the role of the state and the consensus of Washington has been changed by more nuanced perspectives, even if the more most conservative sectors, and there is an agreement that is wide as you um, drive the growth and also tackle the policies for a productive development in a dynamic labor market. And this is one of the key factors that can most contribute to reduce the inequalities and increase the social mobility. As we put the emphasis on the growth and the productive transformation, I see that there are candidates from the conservative parties that have this emphasis, and this is also good for to reduce the inequality and the low social cohesion. As we said, or in the previous version of this document, we saw that the region is showing strengthening and we will continue to delve into this, taking into account the present political situation. Now, concerning the second question, what the countries are doing, the best performing countries in the region, this is a very interesting question. As we said in the presentation, we see the 7 factors I already mentioned. We have the low ability to grow, the social protection, and I will not repeat the 7 of them again, but these are very important causes for the situation of inequality and low social mobility we're seeing. And the best performing countries are getting results because they are doing things right in these 7 dimensions in growth and the productive structure in systems of social protection with more coverage, better educational systems. Well, there are not many countries that they are doing these tasks, or the data would be much better. We see here how the Gini indexes on average are very high, and we have a gap with OECD of 14 points. But it is important, or the question that we should pose ourselves is that we already know that there are these main factors, but the question is why we're not doing that. Maybe we can follow up this later on. But in terms of knowledge, we do know what we have to do, but the problem is how we do it, so that there are societies, and this is not just a problem related to the government, but to the policies of each government and each society. And finally, if there are more efficient manner to reduce the gaps, I think I already answered this partially. And concerning the vulnerable points or sectors, we have the players out there, but when we think of the most vulnerable sectors, we would first need to identify them in each one of the countries with the in artificial intelligence and the digital transformation, that we have the precision work that can be conducted to identify them. And in here, we have a very important role played by the cash transfers, and we have to complement them with the policies against discrimination and with education and labor insertion policies that should have a transformative effect on those realities. Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. And now Yolanda Morales from El Economista in Mexico, the newspaper, who will convey her questions now. The question, the reduction of the flows of remittances to Mexico can produce an increase of the poverty levels. In the document, it said that the cash transfers help reducing these poverty levels. Is this just a seasonal factor, or is this an eradication of this scourge of poverty? Finally, you speak in the document of the educational insertion of migrant people to reduce inequality. This includes Mexico? Because you said that this was an important point for the in-transit before the taking of the Donald Trump took office. And uh, so, Mr. Arena, you will answer this question. Well, concerning the first question, This is related to the reduction of remittances flows to Mexico that can translate into more poverty. According to the official data from the Bank of Mexico, show that between January and September 2025, the amount accumulated of remittances that Mexico has received is 5.5% lower compared to the same period of time in 2024. And that's why we understand that you asked this question, whether in this comparison period, which would be the potential impact. Well, this decrease in the remittances may have some negative results or impacts, and I would make a difference between the reduction of the rate and the reduction of poverty itself. I think that they can have some effects in terms of reducing the poverty rate. And it has been proposed in different documents that the remittances have a positive influence in the growth and the reduction of poverty in the destination countries and more funding for the private sectors in order to increase the consumption and more investment in their communities. And therefore, I would say that my question would be restricted to that area. And then the transfer of cash transfers would reduce the poverty in a permanent manner, but the cash transfer not contributed cash transfer contribute to the reduction of poverty in the region, as we mentioned before. And this is also in the version of this program in 2024. They do the benefits in a stable manner to the elderly citizens in the region, and Mexico outstands for this in the region. And this implies for the region, according to the estimates we made, the reduction of 5.2% of poverty in this population. This is equivalent to 2.5 million people in 2021. And since poverty is multidimensional, the eradication of this poverty in a permanent manner would not be guaranteed only from the cash transfers.
But it demands comprehensive public policies that include, apart from non-contributive contributory cash transfers, quality education systems, access to universal health, creation of quality employment in a context of sustainable and productive growth, which puts inclusive social development within the strategies in the countries. And the third question, you can talk about school inclusion of migrant persons to reduce this inequality, and you ask if it includes Mexico. Yes, the recommendation is for the entire region, and considering that, it includes Mexico. School inclusion of boys, girls, and adolescents in a migrant situation from the point of view of human rights also contributes to social cohesion in the transit or destination country. It is also important to consider that migrant school inclusion requires the implementation of those mechanisms. It is not something easy. It requires an operation in different dimensions, and I will mention a few. The matching of basic studies, the accelerated programs of school, recognition of cultural diversity, economic help and subsidy for material and transportation, also awareness of the educational community in terms of cultural diversity. And with that, I would like to conclude with my answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Alberto Arenas. Taller Colim from Canal TN 23 Guatemala is sending us the following question. Is Guatemala in the trap of inequality of low social mobility advised by ECLAC in its 2025 reports? And what are the actions suggested for addressing it? Thank you very much, Daniel Colin, for that question. This trap, the trap that we have been talking about, is a trap that characterizes almost all countries in the region without almost no exception, and it also includes Guatemala. And specifically Guatemala, the data from the social panorama show that Guatemala is one of the 4 countries with the highest concentration of income in the region. The first decile receives only 0.8% of the total income, while the 10th captures 36%. Regarding multidimensional poverty, Guatemala registers the highest incidence among the countries with available data, with approximately 78% of its population affected by multidimensional poverty, well above the regional average of 20.9. Other social gaps indicate that indigenous young people between 20 and 29 years old in territories of a high indigenous presence, only 3.5 access education compared to 16.7 in non-indigenous young people. It also has one of the most severe gaps. 94% of students of public schools and 79% of private schools have low performance in the PISA 2022 test. ECLAC, together with IDB and Guatemala, conducted a regional summary on inequality in Guatemala City this year, and governmental authorities presented the different initiatives being presented to reduce inequality. ECLAC acknowledged the efforts made by the Guatemalan government to reduce poverty, inequality, and made available recommendations for the government. Of course, the IDB and other development banks are also committed and supporting Guatemala. We believe that political will is present. However, we must say that one of the obstacles in Guatemala is the weak institutional capacities. It will be very hard to advance without strengthening those capacities. And as we have been saying at ECLAC, it is not only a matter of funding, it is a matter of perspective, political, technical abilities of TOPP. And also there must be some governance issues that should be resolved to face the situation. The third trap that we have identified at ECLAC as frequent in the countries of the region is that trap of low institutional capacities and ineffective governance. And Guatemala is a country that, with no doubt, is trapped within that syndrome and situation. Those were our comments. Bloomberg, through Mr. Salazar, asks, why is there a high rate of Gini with large economies in the region such as Colombia, Panama, and Brazil? And which are the actions that Latin America should implement to correct this inequality? Because it seems to be within this dilemma. This is Daniel Salazar from Bloomberg. Thank you very much for your question. The average Gini index is the highest one in the entire region. It is only lower than the one of sub-Saharan Africa. This means that some Latin American countries have the highest levels of inequalities, and they're contributing to the average. According to the results of household surveys, the upper decile concentrates 34.4% of the total income, while the lower one, 1.7. This is a gap of almost 20 times higher between the income of the highest 10% and the lowest 10%. This pattern is characteristic of a development form that settles in these profound structural inequalities that we have been mentioning, and that have to do with the characteristics of the difference in productivity, productive sectors, the lack of a capacity to grow, the deficiencies of social and tax policies, the 7 factors that we mentioned. It could be even higher depending on how it is calculated. When we have the information of surveys with tax records and national accounts, the highest income would exceed 50%. So depending on how it is measured, the data becomes worse. Using different indicators, we have different situations, and Brazil has a high concentration of income such as Colombia and Panama, all exceeding the average in the region. And it is important to mention that Brazil also presents one of the most important reductions in income inequality with a drop in the Gini index between 2021 and 2024. Regarding which actions should be implemented in Latin America to correct the situation, I won't be repeating this again. We said that in this report, we recommend 5 strategies, but there are 2 or 3 that we also recommend to account for the 7 factors that were not addressed in depth. However, it is very clear in the presentation and in the report. Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary. This is Mirta Rodriguez from La Estrella Panama newspaper. And she has the following questions. The report identifies a trap of high inequality, low social mobility regarding education, gender inequality, discrimination, violation of human rights. Where does ECLAC locate Panama within this trap compared to other countries? And according to ECLAC, which would be the factors that deepen this trap in Panama, despite its sustained economic growth? And she says, taking into account statistics, it seems that Panama has a persistent disconnection between the growth in GDP and the creation of formal employment. From the point of view of ECLAC, which elements of the Panamanian productive elements explain this situation? This is from Mirta Rodriguez, La Estrella newspaper, Panama. Thank you very much for that question. It is not a matter of where we can locate Panama. It has to do with what the data say about Panama. It says that the Gini index exceeds the value of 0.5, that among the countries with available information in the region is the second highest one in the region. The regional average is 0.45. We see important gaps of access and learning between urban and rural areas and education and other population groups. We see gaps. For instance, the lowest percentage, 20% of people with disabilities that access the labor market. Also, we see an important gap regarding indigenous peoples that is shown in lower possibilities of indigenous young people to enter tertiary education according to the census of 2023. In the territories with the highest concentration of indigenous people, it was 10.7 against 31.6 of non-indigenous young people. And as highlighted in the report, to reduce these gaps, we must strengthen social protection systems to reach the most vulnerable groups. Regarding the second question, as if Panama has a disconnection between the growth of the GDP and the generation of employment, in fact, we have the diagnosis of this trap of low capacity to grow, but we have the data per country, not of all countries, of most countries and large countries. But one of the few exceptions that do not fall in the pattern of low capacity to grow, it is mostly one of the economies with a high rate between 90 and 24. Panamanian economy grew at approximately 5.5% per year. This is something that most countries would like, more than twice than the average growth rate of Latin America and the Caribbean in the same period. This is a contrast with most of the countries in the region. And over the same period, the number of employed people grew annually on average around 3.3, which is also above the region's average. According to the labor market survey of October 2024, the unemployment rate reached 9.5, which is 12.3 in the case of women and 7.4 in the case of men. Of course, the employment situation has been affected by other issues, such as in a specific area, such as construction and mining. But the answer here is that the growth of the GDP over these years has been promoted in Panama by high productivity sectors that do not necessarily create a lot of employment, such as financial services and the services in the Panama Canal. And we have always said this, although growth is important, we need to see what is behind that growth. It is important for it to be broad growth, diversified growth, and not growth in only one sector in oil and the canal, financial services, or other sectors. where not many people are employed. The conclusion and recommendation would be, therefore, for a country such as Panama, is that we need to redouble efforts in policy and production and diversification. And in fact, Panama is doing this. They're implementing industrial policies, and ECLAC is in fact helping with a strategy right now so that Panama can develop a strategy for this sector, which is one of the sectors that promotes modern services, for a diversification of modern services. Thank you very much. And Mayra Coloarte from Forbes magazine is asking the following question. Which strategies of technological inclusion is the Central American region promoting to reduce educational inequalities, and which challenges are there in the region for advancing towards inclusive social development? This is for Central America, Mayra Oluarte from Forbes magazine. Alberto Arenas, please. Which technological inclusion strategies are being promoted in the region of Central America to reduce educational inequality? The countries of the region, including those of Central America, have focused mostly on expanding access to digital technologies. And that has been done through investment in infrastructure, among other issues, mostly to ensure a greater connectivity. That is the panorama of what is happening in the region and also in Central America.
This has been particularly relevant to reduce the inequalities between the urban and rural sector, although they still persist with major gaps, and we have a need to continue investing there. There is a heterogeneity also in the region for this matter that is present in Central America. For example, the population for the lower quintile populations like on Honduras and El Salvador have lower access to internet at home compared to the wealthier sectors. So while this gap is relatively smaller in the others, the ECLAC will foster to continue expanding the connectivity and investing also in providing digital equipment for the educational centers and for the training of trainers in order to improve the competency of digital skills in order to use them in the teaching and learnings and reduce the risk. I would like to highlight as closing that the financial sustainability is also very important to do other investments in education and to prepare people for the transition from the education for the labor work or in the future and advancing in the reduction of the educational gap. The second question is related to the challenges in the region to progress towards the inclusive social development and based on what the Executive Secretary has done and in concordance with the second summit of social development was held in Doha in September. The countries propose advancing to the Social Development Compact, and this has been echoed by the summit, including in different parts of the political statements and the different proposals. This proposal is given in a strategy of development that places people and their rights at the core, where the hunger and poverty-free life is promoted from different dimensions. As the Executive Secretary said, that this is in line with the inclusive social development agenda that was agreed upon in the Conference of Social Development in 2019 in Mexico, where it is underscored the need to have the comprehensive and universal resilience social protection systems to attain the quality social policies and to guarantee the social rights, including the health, the education, and moving in these systems of comprehensive care systems. Also, having better financing for the social protection in order to struggle directly the poverty and reducing the inequality. Basically, where we set a minimum expenditure standard to tackle poverty in the region. The design of public policy is very important, and also having the minimum standard for expenditure in order to reduce the poverty and to outroot poverty in the region. The economic growth is also very important and should be sustained in order to have this level of welfare that would guarantee the financial sustainability of the social protection that is one of the pillar of the inclusive social development in the region. Thank you very much, Alberto Arenas. We are all getting at the conclusion of this launching and press conference. If there are further questions or there are other questions that are coming in, and we will answer the rest of them as quickly as possible. We have a question from Latina Garcia from the Dominican Republic, also from the magazine of international relationships. And unfortunately, we will not be able to answer your question live, but be reassured that we will answer those questions in writing. Mr. Executive Secretary, we are now at the closing of this launching. Well, we have taken a long time. I will be very brief. Therefore, I would like to say that this report this year is particularly important, not only because the topic of social development is a core piece, a very significant one, because we also have a situation of the worldwide economy that is not the most favorable. Will not be a major thrust of the world economy in terms of a boom of commodities, of other phenomena that took place in the past and that were helpful for Latin America for growth. There is now a situation that has been accumulated with a lot of discontent, and there is a strong demand for more well-being, and that is being very impactful. There are many frustration in the political system, polarizations, discussions, and that are jeopardizing the democratic institutional framework. And many of these discontents are related to the inequality, the lack of social mobility, and there is this feeling that the children will not be better off than their parents. Mm, Ascending social mobility and so on. And I think that we have made an effort in this report to identify the 7 main reasons. And although there is a lot of literature and many discussions going on, it's important to put order in these matters. And we are offering now a kind of restructuring for topic that is very complex, that has different sides to have this in-depth discussion. And we are sure at ECLAC that these are the 7 important pillars, although they are not all that is required. This is part of what we have to do. And there are some other questions. Well, we know that this is in the document, and why aren't we doing too much to tackle this issue? But this was too much to ask from the ECLAC Social Division Unit. Thank you very much, the journalists, to help us disseminate this document and to have an influence with this discussion that is very important for all the countries in the region with no exception. Thank you very much.